You've probably all heard of, or at least encountered, magic dirt theory. And magic dirt theory is the theory that specific patches of dirt have magical properties. And there's some examples of this that are easy to point to. One example is that some people note that the economy of California is bigger than the economy of Mexico. And the economy of Texas plus, the rest of the southwestern states over to California, well, that's another Mexico right there. And so, because those territories were taken from Mexico by the United States, some people claim that the United States took 2/3 of Mexico's economy, which is simply not true. When those territories were taken, they were sparsely populated frontier areas. There were only, a few tens of thousands of people in all of those areas from the Gulf of Mexico to the Pacific coast. And, there wasn't anything like the economic output of, let's say southern Mexico at the time. So the U.S. did not take 2/3 of Mexico's economy, and there's no guarantee that the economies of those areas would have developed anything close to how they have developed, under Mexican law, under Mexican rule, and populated with, Mexican people versus populated with Anglo people and ruled according to Anglo law. And so this is an example of magic dirt theory. People assume that those economies would have developed to the same extent if they had been under a different jurisdiction and populated with different people. But that assumption can't be made. It doesn't come from, the economy doesn't come from the dirt. The dirt is not magical. The economy is built by particular people working under particular rules. And so, that sense of grievance that some people feel saying, 2/3 of Mexico's economy was taken by the United States is simply not true. Or it's founded on, fallacious narratives. So, there's one application of this magic dirt theory that doesn't get a lot of attention, and that is to miscegenation. A lot of Western men are looking for non-Western women in various non-Western countries, including, let's say, Eastern Europe, who they're kind of Western, semi-Western countries with semi-Western people, but not totally. And, the benefits often cited for these foreign women are that they're more traditional, they're more feminine, they're more domestic. And this is an example of the magic dirt theory because, while the magic dirt under America gave us wealth, for example, and presumably Western Europe as well, the magic dirt under Eastern Europe and various non-European countries presumably, gave them traditional feminine domestic women. And, that's the only reason for that. And not only is, the magic dirt blessing them with these supposedly, feminine and domestic and traditional women, but our magic dirt, if we bring those women here and race mix with them, our magic dirt will make the children American, just like us. So there's kind of two instances of this magic dirt theory tied up in this phenomenon. So the magic dirt of these foreign places is blessing them with, feminine and domestic and traditional women, and then the magic dirt of America, or pick a random Western country, will if brought here, will bless them with offspring that are of our people. And so this is a real example of this magic dirt theory, and boomer cons are all over this. I know tons of boomer men, divorced boomer men, who, from all socioeconomic strata, from the very bottom of the working class to, upper middle class men, boomer men of all sorts of social strata who have gone through sometimes multiple messy divorces with Western women, and they're on a Southeast Asian rebound wife, right? And they all rave about it like it's the best thing they've ever discovered. Like, oh my gosh, you got to get you one of these. They really know how to treat a man. Well, it's like, no, duh, they really know how to treat a man. They just won the friggin' lottery, right? By their standards. They got a meal ticket, they got this ticket to riches, and, they get a genetic upgrade for their children. So, they're fucking pleased as punch. So, no surprise that they're happy. But one thing that inexplicably does seem to happen in these cases is, by the time they get their green card, or at the very latest their citizenship, they've started to become much less magical in a variety of ways. Much less, subservient and supportive and domestic, and, they change. They start to change. And I surmise that, the reason has more to do with incentives. First of all, the reason they were like they supposedly are in their homelands has to do with incentives. The reason they're traditional and domestic and, feminine is because, they have fewer rights. They have fewer opportunities. And the men in those countries are more sexist and even misogynistic. And that's why these women are more traditional and feminine and domestic, because, they have to be. That's where the incentives lead them in those environments. That's where those incentives created by those men kind of guide them. That's what they have to do to get status and resources in their societies, because those are the incentives that prevail. And we have other incentives here. Incentives that, destabilize families and promote conflict between men and women and competition between men and women, for jobs and status and for other things, political power. And, it's a different set of incentives. And so they start to behave differently, after a while here. The magic wears off, that they inherited from their magical dirt back home. And, they start to behave more like they're incentivized to behave in Western countries. And that's the only reason that Western women behave in those ways, right? It's because of the incentives that have been created by, a breakdown in traditional norms and values and expectations, right? Fostered deliberately in many cases by feminism, by the state, by big business, for various reasons, most of them self-serving. And that's where the difference stems from, not from any kind of magic dirt or any kind of application of magic dirt theory. So, don't race mix, guys. That's not the solution here. That's a false promise. That's a false solution. But now that I've talked about the magic dirt theory and, kind of a little bit of where you're going wrong there, what's even wrong with race mixing? What's the big deal about that? Well, I'm not an absolutist on this. I'm not a 100% don't do it kind of guy. I'm not an essentialist. But, in general, I would say don't do it. And there are a lot of risks. There are a lot of costs which are not explained, which are not spelled out, which are not investigated. And the benefits are kind of dubious. So, one thing is, as people of European descent, we have a sort of eugenic legacy from, our ancestors lived for thousands of years in Western civilization. They're adapted to the conditions of Western civilization. They created Western civilization, but also Western civilization created them. And part of that process was eugenic. There were cold winters that weeded out a lot of deadbeats, and there was harsh justice that weeded out a lot of ne'er-do-wells. And what was left, there was also a lot of, downwardly mobile descendants of nobles and successful commoners who were, constantly carrying their genetic material down to the lowest socioeconomic strata that survived, while, the deadbeats and ne'er-do-wells were getting, dropped from the gene pool. So what you end up with is a pretty homogeneous and high-quality population. And that's a eugenic legacy, a powerful eugenic legacy that is potentially being squandered by just haphazardly mixing with, whoever from wherever, even if they happen to be fairly elite samples of their respective populations. Who knows what's going to come out of that. And you have in, stock breeding or whatever, you have pure breeds, thoroughbreds, that have characteristics, traits that breed true from generation to generation, right? And then you have mutts or crossbreeds or half-breeds, or hybrids or whatever you want to call them, that just have kind of random characteristics, right? So if you have a winning hand, you can think about it this way. If you have a winning hand in poker and another winning hand in poker, a third hand drawn from both of those hands might be stronger than the average hand, but it's not necessarily as strong as either of those. So if you've got a combination that works or a formula that works, mixing it with another one, even that one that works, doesn't necessarily produce something that works. So there's a lot of risk. There's a lot of uncertainty. Hybrids for many generations kind of have a huge amount of variation and uncertainty in their characteristics for many, many generations before that settles down into something predictable that's once more, what we would call a pure breed or thoroughbred or whatever the terminology is for whatever species you're dealing with. And so, there's a lot of risk. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's no obvious reward. And really, like, the propaganda pushing this is tremendously destructive and irresponsible and criminal, I would say, that this has been pushed as an ideal. And if you look at the media, you see it everywhere, in movies and television and ads, and it's just pushed relentlessly. But the benefits are kind of illusory. And even some people think once we're all mixed into a beige, undifferentiated blob, then, racial differences will be gone. There'll be more harmony. There'll be more cooperation. That's one, kind of plausible benefit that is sold for this whole undertaking. But that's not even necessarily the case because, when you mix a bunch of diversity together, you don't get less diversity. You can get more diversity. So, yes, while you're going to break up distinct categories, you're not going to decrease the variation or the diversity of the individuals that exist. You're going to multiply it. You're going to have all these different combinations. And there's going to be no cohesion. There's going to be no identity. There's going to be no loyalty because loyalty has a lot to do with kinship for reasons that I've explained in the past, because kinship makes, trust and altruism and reciprocity evolutionarily stable and self-enforcing, and defection and betrayal and free riding and parasitism against kin is evolutionarily self-punishing because you're punishing other instances of your own genes and therefore decreasing their fitness, decreasing their ability to survive and reproduce. And so by the same token, altruism and trust and reciprocity towards kin are evolutionarily self-rewarding and self-propagating because you're helping other instances of your own genes to succeed and thrive. And so all this stuff is inextricably tied up with kinship. And so by mixing all this up and producing more random variation and decreasing the size of distinct kin groups, you're not necessarily creating more cooperation. You're potentially creating a lot more chaos and conflict and disunity and acrimony. And so none of the benefits that are sold are actually really plausible with this. There aren't any plausible benefits. There are some possible benefits, however unlikely, but there's also a lot of, unpredictability and risk and obvious costs associated with this. And so that's why it's bad. And, the magic dirt theory doesn't hold any water, so it's not a solution to this other problem that we're having. So just, for now, probably don't do it and just kind of stick to your own. Check out the links below. You can support the channel. You can like this video, share, subscribe, and even have a little bit of merchandise Talk to you later.